So I recently just watched contrary to popular belief, Death and Rebirth is actually a mostly alright retelling of the entirety of Evangelion. I do say mostly because naturally a 60-minute movie adapting over 24 episodes of a TV show is, well, kind of a fool's errand. That isn't to say they don't try their darnest to make said material work, it's just that, while there is some well-done editing and some pretty smart restructuring of the show's story here to be a cinematic narrative, naturally it just doesn't succeed in every way it wants to. But that doesn't mean it's awful, to be honest. If you don't have 14 or so hours to binge the original show leading up to End of Evangelion, or because you want to watch the rebuilds, this isn't too bad a way to prepare you for those things. I should probably also mention that the first 2/3 of the movie is naturally the recap, while the last third is the incomplete first 30 minutes of End of Evangelion. Basically, the film is restructured to push the narrative forward by jumping all over the place, but thankfully plays it smart by segmenting the progression of the narrative into a handful of arcs that cover each of the main players from the cast. Everyone here who is a part of the main cast gets at least a sub 10-minute segment for you to get a feel of them, and there are of course several of the more iconic elements for the show, as well as choppily done up action set pieces to keep you giddily engaged with the philosophical tale of trauma, depression, and humanity. The story itself is basically an alien invasion tale, mixed with a political thriller and a coming-of-age story, which covers the life of Shinji Ikari, Asuka Langley Soryu, and Rei Ayanami, the young mentally broken pilots of the titular Evangelions. Said AV units are massive mechs that the gang, along with their team of equally mentally messed up handlers, must use to battle cosmic monstrosities that threaten to wipe out the last bits of humanity that exist in a cool underground city. Naturally, it's all completely simplified. Plot points are cut to their bare minimum, entire arcs are simply lost, and well, it goes by extremely quickly. But the quick pacing isn't actually a bad thing, since the film never feels boring at all. But with a heavy heart, I have to say I'm sorry. The inflation story was cut. A true seam, I know, and the real reason fans must hate this. I mean, how can you enjoy Evangelion without the Asuka inflation subplot or more pen? Truly a crime, and one that taints the movie's reputation. All joking aside, even if a lot is missing, the more impactful scenes are presented in such a way that they still hit you in the gut, even if you know nothing about these characters originally. The story is still incredibly relatable, even if it's wrapped up into a big monster movie. I mean, Asuka's attempt at suicide and the way it's handled, even recut, is still absolutely devastating, and in some cases, the editing allows us to understand and really relate to why she feels the way she does and acts the way she can due to how compact her story is. Sure, things like Shinji's introduction and arrival are a bit too quickly rushed, but after the first 10 or so minutes of the movie, the film's pace does actually manage to balance out between being extremely speedy and slow enough you're able to understand and take in what's going on. Evangelion's tale on the surface is a simple sci-fi action film, where our young heroes must fight invading aliens in a post-apocalyptic tale of innocence lost and emotional health. But it quickly becomes a biblically charged story of what it means to truly accept ourselves and be human. As for the characters, Shinji is, yes, the protagonist, but I feel the film presenting the story through the eyes of all three of the pilots as equals gives them a better feel. Shinji is the unlikely, sometimes really unlikable, but sometimes equally sympathetic main character, with Asuka being the bratty, insecure, full of herself loudmouth, and Rei is the more reserved, quiet ghost of a girl with a sinister secret. And with that description of both, it's quite clear, Masato is indeed the best girl. Speaking of Masato, she plays the role of mentor, handler, and double agent voice of reason. Gendo is the distant and cold leader and father of Shinji, and everyone else gets enough of a note to be known, but really it's just enough to give you an understanding of who they are in the story, and why you should feel bad for them with what is to come in End of Eva. I do appreciate that the film at least gives us the trinity of needed scenes for almost everyone here. A scene where they are at their best, their worst, at least in terms of here. Shinji has far worse moments, as you'll see eventually in the next video, and they're most human. Some of the characters do some pretty heinous shit to either themselves or others, but they aren't exactly vilified, just shown as how they are. Some of the best action scenes, shots, and moments from the show are here. The issue is that a lot of the action is cut either too fast, interrupted by text that, while stylistically neat in a sense, is pretty intrusive, and some of the more memorable scenes are voiced over instead of giving us the original piece of the story and the atmosphere. Plus, instead of letting more of the action or conversations get screen time, some of the most infamous scenes get their full length here. And these scenes kind of take the steam out of the film for a moment when they happen, since if anything could have been cut down, it's stuff like the elevator scene between Asuka and Rei. And I don't care how many YouTube SCAs disagree with me on on that. It's a boring scene in the context of a movie like this that is supposed to be a lot more quick-paced. Not to say that the conversation between them is boring, it's just that the lead-up, where they're just standing there and nothing is happening, it does kind of detract from the film. Still, the action is visually striking, cool, and memorable, and a lot of it is so darn inspiring to watch play out. There are also some fantastic moments of genuine terror and horror that happen throughout the film. In terms of the animation, it's reused from the show, but with how absolutely fantastic the show looks and was animated, I cannot complain about that at all. Everything is fluid, the colors are great, all the characters are extremely memorable design-wise, and while the angels don't get enough screen time, their visuals are also great as well, and the Eva units look simply iconic. Seriously, this film's animation is just so pretty to look at. I've always loved how Eva looks as a series, so having essentially one of those best animation videos but in an official format is really neat. You know, I gotta be real here. While I do think the dub is iconically atrocious, it's honestly so fitting and earnest for Eva that I can't help but love it. Like, when I think of the series, I think of the original dub, and it's obvious that the cast are generally doing their best and putting in a whole lot of emotion. And if you're wondering how I feel about the Netflix redub, to put it nicely, it's not very good. For the soundtrack, again, it's extremely iconic, even if so much of it is just classical tunes, which, while they are great and do sound striking, it just isn't really my thing, to be honest. Hearsay, I know, and I get the thematic use of them, but like, I prefer when the movie has its own original music. Although I will say the Ode to Joy bit is just fantastic, so there is that. And the rest of the sound effects throughout the movie are competent and sound good. And with all that said, Evangelion Death and Rebirth is, well, it's not perfect, but all the fan hate towards it is just silly. Is it a good replacement for the show itself? No, but it's still a fun watch that has enough emotion, narrative, and fun that I enjoy it and do recommend it. If anything, it's at least a good reminder if you haven't seen the show in a while but want to watch End of Eva. It has some pacing, editing, narrative, and character issues, but that's just going to come with it being a recap film that's cut down from 14 hours to 60 minutes. And with what it does well, it is decent. So, do I recommend you give it a watch? If you're able to watch all of Eva, go for that first. But if you don't have the time, or if you're like me where you can still get a kick out of something like this, or you're just wanting to watch this, then End of Eva, go for it. You got nothing to lose, and anyone who hates this with a passion really is just silly and needs to relax. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I want to give a big thank you to the show's patrons, my friend Orion Knight for making the wonderful Art of Punish Neat you see in the intro and here, along with in the thumbnail, as well as my friend Alex for touching up on the thumbnail design, and Alexander for performing and doing up the show's intro song. My Patreon and their social media accounts will be in the description, and if you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, please leave them down below, as I read and reply to everything. This is Thierry Williamson signing off until the next video. See ya, guys!